My husband's funeral was 8 months ago. I remember folding his dress shirts into a box for Goodwill and thinking, this is what the end of a life looks like. Cardboard, packing tape, a Tuesday afternoon. His name was Arthur. 51 years we were married. He died, or I was told he died, of a massive cardiac arrest in the parking lot of a Canadian Tire on a Thursday morning in March. An ambulance came. A hospital called. A doctor with tired eyes told me there was nothing they could do. I planned his funeral in 4 days. I chose the casket. I chose the hymns. I chose which photo to put on the program. My daughter helped me write the obituary. She cried more than I did, and I felt guilty about that, the way grief sometimes makes you feel guilty for whatever you're doing or not doing. We buried him at a cemetery not far from the house we shared for 38 years. My son-in-law carried one side of the casket. It was a cold day for April. There were tulips starting in the yard when I came home, and I couldn't look at them for weeks. 8 months later, I was standing in the frozen food aisle at the Loblaws on Hazeldean Road, reaching for a bag of edamame, when I saw my dead husband pushing a cart toward the yogurt section. I dropped the edamame. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I just stood there with my hands still outstretched and my brain completely refusing to process what my eyes were sending it. The man was wearing a green jacket I didn't recognize. His hair was a little longer. He had a beard now, which Arthur never wore. But the way he tilted his head to read a label, that slight squint, chin tucked down, glasses sliding, I had seen that 10,000 times at our kitchen table. Someone behind me said, "Excuse me," and reached past me for the freezer door. I stepped aside automatically. I kept watching him. He put the yogurt in the cart. He turned. For 1 second, maybe less, his eyes passed over me. He looked away. He didn't stop. He didn't react. He just turned his cart toward the next aisle and kept walking, and I stood in that frozen food section with cold air pouring out of the open freezer behind me, thinking one single thought on repeat. That was Arthur. I'm 67 years old. I've had moments where I thought I saw him before. In the first weeks after he died, I saw the back of a man in a Shoppers Drug Mart and my heart lurched. That's normal. My grief counselor told me. The brain looks for what it has lost. It plays tricks. This was not that. I know my husband's hands. I know the specific angle of his shoulders. I know the way he breathes through his mouth a little when he's reading something. The man in the green jacket did all of those things. I left my cart where it stood, and I followed him. I know how that sounds. I'm a 67-year-old retired school librarian from Kanata, and I followed a man through a Loblaws like something out of a movie I would normally turn off after 20 minutes. But I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't thinking at all. I was running on something more animal than thought. He went to the deli counter. He ordered sliced Black Forest ham, Arthur's favorite. Never mine. I always found it too sweet. And while he waited, he looked at his phone. Then he picked up his order, tucked it in the cart, and moved toward the checkout. I watched him pay. Tap, not chip, tap. Arthur had never trusted tap, always said it felt like magic and not in a good way. I watched this man tap his card without a second thought. He walked out the automatic doors and I followed him into the parking lot. He got into a dark blue Subaru Forester with Ontario plates. I stood 15 feet away behind a concrete pillar like I had any idea what I was doing, and I memorized the plate number by saying it out loud to myself, quietly, 3 times, the way I used to teach children to memorize things. Chunking, small pieces. Say it 3 times. Then I went back inside and sat down in the little cafe area near the entrance, and I shook for about 10 minutes. The drive home, I don't fully remember. I made it, obviously, because I'm here telling you this. But I sat in my driveway for a long time before I could make myself go inside. The house we shared for 38 years felt different when I walked in. I'd been slowly making it mine again since the funeral. Moved his recliner to the garage, rearranged the bedroom, bought a new duvet cover in a color he would have called too bright. Small acts of reclaiming a life. That evening, standing in the kitchen, all of it felt thin, like wallpaper over something I hadn't looked at yet. I called my daughter. She lives 40 minutes away in Barhaven, her and my son-in-law and my 2 grandchildren. When she answered, I could hear the kids in the background. Bath time, something splashing, someone complaining about shampoo. Normal life sounds. Mom, what's up? I almost didn't say it. I almost said nothing. Actually, I almost said sorry to bother you. Call me later. Because saying it out loud meant something I wasn't sure I was ready for. I saw your father today, I said. At Loblaws. I think he's alive. The splashing stopped, or maybe she moved to another room. Either way, the background went quiet. Mom, I know how it sounds. Mom, you've been under so much. I followed him to his car, I said. I have his license plate. There was a long pause. I'll come over, she said. She arrived with my son-in-law and without the kids, which told me she'd taken it seriously enough to arrange childcare first. That meant something to me. She brought Tim Hortons, 2 medium double-doubles, the way we've had coffee together since she was a teenager, sneaking sips from my mug. We sat at the kitchen table and I told them everything. The green jacket, the yogurt, the ham, the tap payment, the plate number written on the back of a grocery receipt now sitting on the table between us. My son-in-law was quiet for most of it. He's a careful man, thoughtful in the way that can read as cold if you don't know him. He picked up the receipt and looked at the plate number. Did he see you? He asked. His eyes passed over me for a second. He didn't stop. He didn't recognize you, or he didn't want to. I hadn't thought of it exactly like that. The question sat between us. My daughter reached across the table and held my hand. Mom, grief can do things. It can make us see. I know what grief does, I said. I've lived in it for 8 months. This was different. She looked at her husband. He looked at the plate number. I can make some calls, he said finally. He works in insurance, my son-in-law, which I didn't think was relevant at the time. He went into the living room with his phone. My daughter and I sat with our coffee and didn't say much. At one point, she asked if I'd eaten dinner, and I realized I hadn't, and she made me toast, the way she used to make it when she was small and playing house. 2 pieces, too much butter, cut diagonally. My son-in-law came back after about 20 minutes. He sat down. He didn't look at me right away, and that told me something before he said a single word. The plates are registered to a man named A Man in Orleans, he said. 64 years old. The name on the registration is not Arthur's. So it's not him, my daughter said, and I could hear the relief starting in her voice before she'd even finished the sentence. The name is different, he said carefully, but I put in the call to someone at work. We deal with fraud cases, and I asked him to cross-reference the new name with some flagged files. He paused. He called me back before I came out here. The kitchen was very quiet. The life insurance claim, I said. His face told me I was right before his mouth did. Arthur, my Arthur, had a life insurance policy through Sun Life. $240,000. I had submitted the claim 3 weeks after the funeral, with the death certificate, with everything they asked for. The money had come through in July. I had put it in a GIC, hadn't touched it, couldn't bring myself to think of it as real. My son-in-law looked at his phone, then at me. There's a flag on that policy. It was open for investigation 6 weeks ago, which is why someone at my office had it. The address connected to that plate in Orleans. There's a name on the lease. He paused again. It's a variation of Arthur's middle name, combined with his mother's maiden name. The room tilted slightly. I put both hands flat on the table. He made a new identity, I said. It looks like it might be more complicated than. He faked his death, I said. He took out a life insurance policy, he faked his death, he built a new name, and he's been living 40 minutes away from me in Orleans. My daughter made a sound I will never forget, not quite a word, just a sound. We have to call the police, my son-in-law said. We did. That night, the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit was already involved because of the insurance flag. My son-in-law's call had accelerated something that was already in motion. 2 officers came to the house at 9:30 that evening. I sat at my kitchen table and told the story again. Same table where I'd told it to my daughter 2 hours before. Same receipt with the plate number, now placed in front of someone who put on gloves to pick it up. Over the next 3 weeks, I learned things that rearranged everything I thought I knew about my life. Arthur. I will keep calling him Arthur because that is who he was to me. Whatever name he put on a lease in Orleans, had been planning this for at least 2 years. There was a woman. He had met her through a community sailing club in the Glebe, which I knew nothing about because he had told me those Thursday evenings were a retired men's poker group. I had never questioned it. After 51 years, I trusted him the way you trust your own heartbeat. You don't think about it. It just goes. The woman was younger than me by about 15 years. She didn't know he had faked his death. The officers told me that, and I believed it because I had no reason not to. And also because what he had done was precisely the kind of thing you hide from everyone, including the person you're hiding to be with. He had arranged the cardiac arrest through a combination of bribed paperwork and a contact who worked in hospital administration, someone he had known for years. The investigation would later determine a real ambulance had been called genuinely by a bystander. Arthur had taken something to simulate symptoms, had been treated and discharged under a different name from a different hospital, while someone else signed off on the death paperwork. The body in the casket, and I can barely write this, even now, was not Arthur. It was a man who had died earlier that week with no identified next of kin, arranged through channels I still don't fully understand and don't want to. When the officer explained that to me, I excused myself, went to the bathroom, and sat on the edge of the tub for a while. Just sat there. The grout between the tiles needed cleaning. I noticed that. There was money missing. We had joint accounts, and there were savings accounts I hadn't known existed. Accounts he had opened before we were married and never mentioned, contributed to quietly for decades. Not enormous amounts. We weren't wealthy people, but enough. Enough to start somewhere new. Enough to walk away from 51 years and not look back. Or almost not look back. That was the part I kept returning to in the weeks that followed. His eyes had passed over me in that frozen food aisle, and he had kept walking. Not a flicker, not a hesitation. Whatever I had been to him, I had become something he could look through. My daughter came every day for the first week. She would bring groceries or drop off food from the Lebanese place I like on Hazeldean, sit with me for a few hours, sometimes say nothing, which was the right thing to do. My son-in-law, despite how uncomfortable the whole thing made him, and it made him deeply uncomfortable, I could tell, some combination of anger and an almost professional mortification at having not noticed the insurance flag sooner himself, he was steady. He drove me to the RCMP office twice. He sat outside and waited both times. I have a friend, Gwen, who I've known since our children were in the same class at Beaverbrook Public School back in the 90s. I told her on a Tuesday afternoon over tea in her sunroom, and she cried in a way I still hadn't. Sometimes you need to see your own story on someone else's face to understand how bad it actually is. Arthur was arrested on a Wednesday morning in November, 8 months and 3 weeks after his funeral. They picked him up at his Orleans address. I was not there. I was at my kitchen table with tea and a library book I had been trying to finish for 6 weeks, and my son-in-law called to tell me. "It's done," he said. I looked at the window. It was a gray November morning, the kind that's common here. Flat light, bare trees, a few dry leaves on the back deck. Very ordinary. Thank you, I said. The charges were significant. Fraud over $5,000. The life insurance claim alone was $240,000. Identity fraud. Obstruction. The man who had falsified the death documents was charged separately. The proceedings would take time, the officers told me. These things always do. But they told me the case was strong. I had to repay the life insurance funds, placed in trust while the matter went through court. It was a blow, but I had the house, which was mine, clear title, and a pension from 32 years, with the Ottawa Carleton District School Board and a small RRSP of my own that Arthur had not touched. I was not comfortable, not the way I had expected my later years to look, but I was not without. My daughter wanted me to move closer to them, to Barhaven. I thought about it seriously. I sat with it for several weeks. In the end, I decided to stay on Hazeldean. I know this street. I know the neighbors. I know which houses have dogs and which ones have gardens worth stopping for. The house is mine, and I know every corner of it. Starting over in someone else's neighborhood, even a neighborhood full of people I love, felt like letting him take one more thing. There is a question people don't quite ask, but I can hear underneath everything they do ask, including from my daughter, including from Gwen. Did I have any idea? The honest answer is no. I've examined every memory I have of the past 5 years. The Thursday evenings, the times he seemed distracted, the distance that I had chalked up to retirement and aging, and the natural quieting of a long marriage, and I cannot find the place where the curtain slips. He was ordinary with me. He was present enough. He remembered my sister's birthday. He complained about the price of gas and whether the Sens would ever have a decent season and which brand of coffee was worth buying. Normal life. A normal man in the normal kitchen talking about normal things, while somewhere underneath he was planning to disappear. I think about that a lot. How much of a person can be hidden from you when you've known them for 51 years? How you can share a bed and a bank account and a daughter and 38 years in the same house and still be, in some essential way, a stranger to the person sleeping next to you. I don't say that with bitterness exactly. Bitterness would require some ongoing attachment, and what I felt gradually over those months was more like standing at a window watching a rainstorm. Something happening outside, happening to me, and me watching it from the inside of my own life. What surprised me most was how much easier grief became once I knew the truth. The real grief, the grief that had sat in my chest since April, heavy and wordless, that began to loosen. Not because what he did was small or forgivable, but because the thing I had been grieving turned out to be partly a fiction. I had been mourning a man who had chosen to leave. That is a different kind of loss than death, and in some ways a more honest one. I went back to the library in January, not as an employee, I retired 3 years ago, but as a patron. I started volunteering for the literacy program on Thursday mornings, the same slot that used to be his poker nights. I don't know if that's meaningful or just funny. It felt like something. My granddaughter, who is 7, asked me in the spring why Grandpa was on the news. My daughter had been dreading that question. I happened to be there when she asked it, and before my daughter could shape an answer, my granddaughter said, matter-of-factly, "Is he in trouble?" "Yes," I said. "He's in quite a lot of trouble." She thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "Okay," and went back to her coloring. Children are more resilient than we think. Or maybe they just haven't learned yet that some things are supposed to be unspeakable. It's the adults who build the silence. She just called it what it was and moved on. I'm trying to do the same. The trial date is set. I won't be watching it on a screen or sitting in a gallery. I gave my statement, I answered everything they asked, and now that part of it belongs to the courts. What belongs to me is this house, this street, these Thursday mornings with people learning to read. The daffodils in the front bed are coming up again. I planted them myself last fall, the weekend after the arrest, on a cold Saturday afternoon with my gardening gloves and a bulb planter in ground that was almost too hard. They came up anyway. Things usually do. I keep thinking about the tulips I couldn't look at the spring after the funeral. How I'd walk past the front bed with my eyes down like they'd done something wrong. Grief works like that. It attaches to ordinary things and makes them unbearable. What I didn't know then was that some of what I was grieving wasn't real. And that makes a difference. Not a comfortable one, but a real one. Arthur made a choice. He made it slowly, over years, in small hidden movements. The Thursday evenings, the accounts I didn't know about, the name built from pieces of his own history so he could disappear into it. What strikes me most, looking back, is the patience it required, the sustained dishonesty. You don't do that by accident. You do it by deciding again and again that the people you're leaving behind matter less than what you want. That's not a failure of circumstance. That's a failure of character. And character, I've come to believe, is the only thing that holds a life together when no one is watching. I don't say that bitterly. I say it because it's the most useful thing I've taken from all of this. The choices we make when we think there are no consequences, those are the truest version of who we are. Arthur thought he'd calculated his way out of everything. He had the paperwork, the new name, the distance. What he hadn't calculated was a frozen food aisle on an ordinary Tuesday, and a wife who knew the angle of his shoulders better than he knew himself. What carried me through wasn't certainty. I wasn't sure, standing in that parking lot with the plate number on a grocery receipt, that I wasn't losing my mind. What I had was the discipline to look clearly at what was in front of me, to not let wishful thinking or the easier explanation win. My daughter wanted it to be grief playing tricks. Part of me wanted that too, but paying attention, really paying attention, following a thought all the way to where it leads, even when it's frightening, that's not a small thing. It saved me from something much worse than what I found. And then there's the matter of what comes after. The court dates, the repaid insurance funds, the recalibrating of what the rest of my life looks like. None of that was asked for. I didn't choose any of it, but I chose what to do with it. And I think that's the only freedom any of us actually have. I stayed on Hazeldean. I went back to the literacy program on Thursday mornings. I planted bulbs in hard ground in November and trusted they'd come up. They did. I'm not the same person who stood at a graveside in April with a cold wind off the fields and thought she understood what she'd lost, but I'm still standing. And some mornings, when the light is right and the coffee is hot, my granddaughter calls before school to tell me something completely random about her day. That feels like more than enough.